The catalog tray sat on a concrete ledge, its brass rail still polished, where 1,000 fingers had pulled it forward. Alma had carried it out of the library on her last day of work in 2008, and the security guard had pretended not to see. 26 years of her life lived in those small rectangular pockets, each one holding the ghost of a book someone had needed. Now the tray held nothing but November wind. She watched her husband slide the last of their belongings across the back seat of the 1998 Ford Taurus 2 bags, a plastic bin of photographs, and his slide rule in its leather case. Vincent moved like a man calculating load-bearing tolerances, which he was. 43 years as a civil engineer had taught him to read stress in everything, the way a beam bowed, the way a relationship fractured, the way a son could look at his parents and see nothing but obligation. The eviction notice was dated November 3rd, a Tuesday. Their son Mark had delivered it himself, standing on the porch of the house they'd owned for 37 years, wearing a Patagonia vest that cost more than their monthly Social Security. He had not looked at his mother's face. He had looked past her, at the wall, at the door frame, at anything but the woman who had read him The Little Prince 400 times. "I need the equity," he had said. "The business is underwater. You'll have a place to go." They had no place to go. Vincent had calculated the exact day they would run out of options. November 15th. That was when the temperature would drop below freezing for the first sustained period, and the car would no longer be survivable. He had 17 days to find shelter, and his slide rule told him the only structure he could trust was one he could read stone by stone. The bridge abutment was built in 1927. He had driven past it 1,000 times without seeing it. But now, with the heater dying and the gas gauge dropping, Vincent saw it the way he had seen every structure of his career, as a problem to be solved, a load to be distributed, a shelter to be made from the mathematics of stress and span. The railroad had abandoned the line in 1982. The bridge was gone, but the abutments remained, two massive stone teeth rising from the floodplain, engineered to channel water and deflect wind. He parked the car at the edge of a gravel access road and walked toward it. Alma stayed in the passenger seat, her catalog tray in her lap, her fingers tracing the empty slots where the alphabet had once lived. AJ had been her section. She had known every title, every author, every publication date. She had watched children grow up in that library, watched them discover The Hobbit and To Kill a Mockingbird and Beloved. She had watched them leave and come back and leave again. Now she watched her husband climb into the stone cavity of a bridge abutment, and she thought, this is where we live now. The catalog tray was not empty. In the bottom of the BC pocket, beneath a layer of dust, there was a single card. Alma had put it there on her last day, and she had never told anyone why. The card read, "The Lost Books of the Bodleian Library, 1647-1652. She did not know why she had kept it. She only knew that some things needed to be held, even when no one was looking. Vincent emerged from the stone cavity with dust on his glasses and something like hope in his eyes. "It's dry," he said. "The drainage channels are still intact. The stone is granite fieldstone, not limestone. It won't spall in freeze-thaw. We can make it work. Therefore," Alma thought. "Therefore, we are alive for another 17 days. She did not say this aloud. Instead, she picked up the catalog tray and followed her husband into the dark. Vincent Robert McAllister was born in 1949 in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the only child of a coal miner and a school teacher. He learned to read blueprints before he learned to read books, sitting at his father's kitchen table while the old man traced the structural plans of the mine shafts he would never see again. The dust had killed him at 53. Vincent was 24, fresh out of Penn State with a degree in civil engineering and a slide rule his father had bought him as a graduation present, a K&E Desi Lawn, Model 68-100, manufactured in 1969, the year Vincent walked onto his first job site with a hard hat that was still too large for his head. He had kept that slide rule for 54 years. It sat in a leather case embossed with his initials VRN, and he had never once considered upgrading to a calculator. The slide rule was honest. It required you to understand what you were measuring. It required you to estimate the answer before you found it, so that you would know when the numbers lied. Vincent had taught himself to read bridges the same way, by understanding what they were supposed to do before he trusted the calculations. He had designed 27 bridges in his career. He had inspected 300. He had watched one collapse, the I-35 bridge in Minneapolis, 2007, and he had wept for 3 days because he knew the engineers who had signed off on the gusset plates. He knew their names. He knew their handwriting. He knew that they had gone home to their families every night believing they had done their work correctly. After that, Vincent had stopped sleeping. Alma had found him at 3 a.m., sitting at the kitchen table with his slide rule and a stack of old calculations, checking his own work from 20 years ago. He had checked every bridge he had ever designed. All 27 were sound. But he had checked anyway, because the dead could not be unkilled and the living could not be certain. Alma Marie McAllister was born Alma Marie Castillo in 1952 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the second of 7 children. Her father was a carpenter who built adobe homes that had stood for 300 years. Her mother was a storyteller who had never learned to read, but had memorized every folktale of the Pueblo people and recited them in a voice that smelled of chili and wood smoke. Alma had learned to read at 4, taught by her older sister who had learned from a nun at the mission school. She had read everything, the backs of cereal boxes, the labels on cans, the newspaper her father wrapped his lunch in. She had walked 3 miles to the library in Santa Fe every Saturday from the age of 7, and she had never stopped walking. She became a librarian in 1974, the same year she married Vincent. She had cataloged books for 42 years, first with card catalogs, then with digital systems, and she had always preferred the cards. The cards had texture. They had history. They had the fingerprints of every person who had ever pulled them forward to find a book. On her last day of work in 2008, when the library converted entirely to digital, Alma had taken a single catalog tray from the BC section. She had not asked permission. She had simply placed it in her bag, and the security guard had nodded, because he knew that some things could not be digitized. The tray was walnut, with brass rails and brass dividers manufactured by the Library Bureau in 1924. It held 48 pockets, each one designed to hold 15 cards. 720 cards, each one representing a book that had once existed in the world, waiting to be found. Alma had emptied the cards on her last day, leaving only one. She had never told Vincent about the card. They had been married for 52 years. They had met at a library. Vincent had been there to check the structural integrity of the building, which was leaning slightly to the east. Alma had been there to catalog a donation of Civil War memoirs. She had watched him run his hand along a load-bearing wall, feeling for deflection, and she had known that he was a man who understood weight. She had handed him a book, The Bridge of San Luis Rey by Thornton Wilder. "Read this," she had said. "It's about a bridge that collapses and the people who die on it." Vincent had read it in one night. He had returned the next day to tell her that the book was wrong. The bridge did not collapse because of fate, but because of a design flaw in the central span. He had drawn the corrected design on a napkin, and Alma had kept that napkin for 52 years. They had 3 children, Mark the oldest, Sarah the middle, and Daniel the youngest. Mark had become a real estate developer. Sarah had become a nurse in Portland. Daniel had died in 2003 at 29 of a heart condition that no one had known about until it stopped his heart in the middle of the night. Daniel's death had broken something in both of them, but they had never talked about it. Vincent had built a bookshelf for Alma in the shape of a bridge. Alma had filled it with books. Daniel had loved Slaughterhouse-Five, Catch-22, The Things They Carried, and she had never moved them. When Mark had told them he needed the equity from the house, Vincent had said no. He had said no 3 times. But Mark had explained that the business was failing, that he would lose everything, that his wife and children would be on the street. And Vincent had looked at Alma, and Alma had looked at Vincent, and they had both known that they could not say no to their son. They had signed the papers on a Thursday. The eviction came 30 days later. Mark had not offered to let them stay in the basement. He had not offered to help them find an apartment. He had stood on the porch in his Patagonia vest, holding the eviction notice like it was a receipt for something he had purchased, and he had said, "You'll have a place to go." He had not specified where. Now Vincent stood in the stone cavity of a bridge abutment built in 1927, running his slide rule along the joints, calculating the load-bearing capacity of the walls. The structure was sound. The roof was a single granite slab, 6 feet thick, quarried from somewhere in Vermont and transported by rail. The floor was packed gravel over a drainage bed. The walls were dry-stacked granite fieldstone, fitted so precisely that no mortar had been needed. He had never built anything that would last this long. Alma set the catalog tray on a flat stone that would serve as a shelf. She pulled out the single card and read it again, though she already knew every word. The Lost Books of the Bodleian Library, 1647, 6 and 52. The card had been part of a special collection that Alma had cataloged in 1995. A donor had given the library a set of bound manuscripts, and one of them had contained a reference to a lost archive, books that had been removed from the Bodleian during the English Civil War, hidden in a private collection, and never returned. The card had been a placeholder, a note to herself, a reminder that there were still things to be found. She had never found the lost books, but she had never forgotten them either. Therefore, she thought, I am still a librarian. I still know what is missing. Vincent finished his inspection and sat down on a flat stone, his slide rule in his lap. The drainage channels are clear. The wind will deflect off the upstream face. Will stay dry as long as the roof holds. Will the roof hold? Barring seismic activity or a direct meteor strike, yes. Then we're home. Vincent looked at her. His eyes were the same eyes she had seen in the library 52 years ago, measuring, calculating, seeking the truth of things. Yes, he said, we're home. The Tuesday in November had started like any other Tuesday. Alma had woken at 5:30, as she had for 50 years, and made coffee in the small percolator they had packed. Vincent had woken at 6:00, as he had for 50 years, and drunk the coffee while reading the newspaper on his phone. They had discussed the weather, the price of gas, the fact that the car's heater was making a noise that sounded expensive. They had not discussed the eviction. The notice had arrived on a Friday. Mark had delivered it himself, driving up in his black GMC Yukon with the heated seats and the Bose sound system, and the leather interior that cost more than Vincent's first car and his second car and his third car combined. He had parked in the driveway, blocking Vincent's car, and walked to the front door with the envelope in his hand. Vincent had opened the door. Dad, Mark had said, I need to talk to you. The house had been paid off for 20 years. The equity was $180,000. Mark had explained that he needed it to save his business, that he would pay them back, that they would have a place to go. He had explained everything except where that place would be. Vincent had said no. Mark had said, I'm going to lose everything. Vincent had said, we are also going to lose everything. Mark had said, you have Social Security, you have Medicare, you have options. Vincent had looked at his son's face and seen nothing of himself there. He had seen the face of a man who had learned to justify anything, who had learned to believe that his own needs were the only needs that mattered. He had seen the face of a man who had forgotten that his parents had given him everything and that everything had a cost. Sign the papers, Mark had said, and Vincent had signed. The eviction notice was dated November 3rd, a Tuesday. They had 30 days to vacate. They had 30 days to find somewhere to go. They had 30 days to pack up 52 years of marriage and reduce it to what would fit in a 1998 Ford Taurus with a failing transmission. Alma had packed the catalog tray first. Vincent had packed the slide rule second. They had packed photographs, clothes, a few books, the percolator, a cast iron skillet, and a box of crackers. They had left behind everything else. The furniture, the dishes, the bed they had slept in for 4 decades, the bookshelves Vincent had built, the quilt Alma's mother had made, the Christmas ornaments their children had painted in elementary school, the wedding china they had used exactly 4 times. They had left behind Daniel's books. Alma had stood in front of the bridge-shaped bookshelf and touched the spines one by one. Slaughterhouse 5, Catch-22, the things they carried. She had read each of them after Daniel had died, trying to understand what he had seen in them. She had not understood. She had only understood that her son had loved these books, and that love did not end when the person did. She had taken one book, The Little Prince, the copy she had read to Mark 400 times. She had hoped, irrationally, that Mark would see it and remember. She had left it on the kitchen counter, where he could not miss it. He had missed it. On the Tuesday in November, when the eviction was final, Mark had come to the house one last time. He had stood in the empty living room, surrounded by the ghosts of furniture, and he had looked at his parents as if they were strangers who had wandered into his property. The new owners will be here tomorrow, he had said. You need to be gone. We are gone, Vincent had said. Mark had looked at the catalog tray in Alma's hands. What's that? A catalog tray, Alma had said. From the library. Why would you keep that? Alma had not answered. She had looked at her son's face, at the Patagonia vest, at the leather boots that had never touched mud, and she had seen that he did not understand. He did not understand that some things were not disposable. He did not understand that a catalog tray was not a piece of furniture but a record of every book that had ever been borrowed, every reader who had ever found something they needed, every story that had ever changed a life. He did not understand that she had been the keeper of those stories and that he was asking her to abandon them. Mom, Mark had said, you can't live in a bridge abutment. We don't have a choice, Alma had said. You do. You can go to a shelter. You can apply for senior housing. You can. We don't have a choice, Alma had said again, and her voice had been as calm as still water. Mark had looked at her, and for a moment something had flickered in his eyes, something that might have been guilt, something that might have been recognition. But then it was gone, and he was looking at her the way he had looked at her for the past 10 years, as a problem to be solved, a responsibility to be discharged, a debt to be paid. Fine, he had said, but you can't come back here. We won't, Vincent had said. They had walked out of the house together, Alma carrying the catalog tray, Vincent carrying the slide rule. They had gotten into the Taurus and driven away without looking back. Mark had watched them go from the front porch, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. He had not waved. The Taurus had reached the bridge abutment at dusk. Vincent had parked on the gravel access road, and they had carried their belongings into the stone cavity one piece at a time. The catalog tray went on the stone shelf. The slide rule went on the stone floor. The photographs went in a stack against the wall. The percolator went on a flat stone that would serve as a stove. The cast iron skillet went next to it. The crackers went in a plastic bag. Alma had looked at their new home and seen that it was exactly what Vincent had said it would be, dry, protected from wind, sound. She had seen that the stone walls would hold the heat of a small fire. She had seen that the gravel floor would drain any moisture that entered. She had seen that they could survive here, at least for a while. She had not seen how they would leave. Vincent had sat down on the stone floor, his slide rule in his lap, and he had said, "I'm going to make it safe." How? By reading it. He had spent the next hour running his hands along every joint, every seam, every crack. He had measured the deflection of the roof slab. He had calculated the load-bearing capacity of the walls. He had traced the drainage channels to make sure they were clear. He had found a small leak where a stone had shifted, and he had wedged a piece of granite into the gap, and the leak had stopped. Alma had watched him work and thought, "This is what it means to be married to an engineer. He does not despair. He calculates." She had taken out the single card from the catalog tray and read it again. The Lost Books of the Bodleian Library, 1647-1652. She did not know why she had kept this card. She did not know why it mattered, but she had carried it for 28 years, through 2 library renovations, through the death of her son, through the eviction, through everything. She had carried it because it reminded her that there were still things to be found, still mysteries to be solved, still stories that had not been told. Therefore, she had thought, I am still a librarian. I still believe in the power of what is missing. Outside, the November wind had picked up, and the stone walls had done exactly what Vincent had predicted. They had deflected the wind, channeling it around the cavity, leaving the interior still and silent. They were safe. But they were also trapped, and the only thing that would save them was something they had not yet discovered. The first night was the coldest. Alma had slept in the passenger seat of the Taurus, wrapped in 2 blankets and a coat, while Vincent had stayed awake to monitor the temperature. He had calculated that the car's interior would drop to 28 degrees by 3 a.m., which was survivable but not comfortable. He had been right. At 2:14 a.m., the dashboard clock had read exactly that time, and Alma had woken to find her breath fogging the windows, her joints stiff with cold, her fingers numb despite the gloves. She had not complained. Vincent had started the car at 3 a.m., running the heater for exactly 15 minutes, long enough to raise the temperature above freezing but not long enough to waste significant fuel. He had calculated the fuel consumption rate, the tank capacity, and the number of days they could survive if they used the heater sparingly. He had determined that they could run the heater for 15 minutes every 4 hours without running out of gas before the next Social Security deposit. He had been right about that too. They had moved into the bridge abutment on the 3rd day, after Vincent had confirmed that the interior was dry and stable. They had arranged their belongings in a careful grid, clothes on one side, food on another, photographs in a corner where they would not be stepped on. The catalog tray had gone on the highest ledge, where it would be safe from water and animals. The slide rule had gone in its leather case, next to the catalog tray, as if the 2 objects were keeping watch over each other. Alma had begun writing on the 4th day. She had found a notebook in the plastic bin, a spiral-bound notebook that had belonged to Daniel, with half the pages still blank. She had taken it out, along with a ballpoint pen, and she had started to write. She had written the titles of every book she could remember from the BC section of the catalog tray. She had started with B. Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis, The Babysitter's Club by Anne M. Martin, The Bacchae by Euripides, The Back of the Turtle by Thomas King, The Bad Beginning by Lemony Snicket, The Bad Seed by William March, Bag of Bones by Stephen King, The Bald Soprano by Eugen Ionesco, A Ballad of the Civil War by Mary Stolz, Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress by Dai Siji. She had written 42 titles on the first day. She had written 63 on the second. She had written 81 on the third. By the end of the first week, she had written 312 titles, each one from memory, each one the name of a book that had once existed in the world, each one a story she had held in her hands and given to someone else. Vincent had watched her write and had not asked why. He had been busy making the bridge abutment livable. He had found a piece of corrugated metal and used it to create a windbreak at the entrance. He had collected fallen branches and built a small fire pit, using the drainage channel as a chimney. He had found a spring-fed stream a quarter-mile away and established a route for collecting water. He had calculated the caloric content of their food supply and determined that they could survive for 6 weeks if they rationed carefully. They had rationed carefully. Breakfast was a quarter cup of oatmeal, cooked with water from the stream. Lunch was half a can of soup, shared between them. Dinner was a third of a can of beans, heated in the cast iron skillet. They had crackers for snacks, 2 per day. They had coffee in the morning, 1 cup each, made with the percolator and water from the stream. They had not complained. The days had developed a rhythm. Vincent would wake at dawn and check the temperature, the wind direction, the condition of their supplies. He would walk to the stream and collect water. He would gather firewood. He would inspect the structure of the bridge abutment, looking for any change, any weakness, any sign that the shelter was failing. Alma would wake at dawn and make coffee. She would write in the notebook while the coffee brewed, adding titles to her list, filling page after page with the names of books. She would read the list aloud to Vincent while they ate their oatmeal, and Vincent would listen, and he would not interrupt. She read The Bad Seed when she was 12, Alma had said on the 3rd day. It was the first book that scared her. She told me that she had to sleep with the light on for a week. Who? Vincent had asked. The girl who borrowed it. I don't remember her name. But I remember the book. Vincent had nodded. He had understood that Alma was not just listing books. She was cataloging her life. She was holding on to the stories that had defined her, the readers she had served, the years she had spent in the library building a world out of words. He had started talking about bridges. The abutment is granite fieldstone, he had said on the 5th day. Quarried in Barre, Vermont most likely. Shipped by rail. The joints are dry stacked, no mortar, which means the builders knew what they were doing. Mortar would trap moisture. Moisture would freeze and expand, cracking the stone. Dry stack joints allow water to drain. The structure is self-maintaining. How long will it last? Alma had asked. Another 100 years, maybe 200. The roof slab is 6 feet of solid granite. It will outlast us. Will it outlast the books? Vincent had looked at the notebook, at the pages filled with titles, at the careful handwriting that had not changed in 50 years. Yes, he had said. It will outlast the books. They had been in the bridge abutment for 2 weeks when the first problem arose. The food was running out faster than Vincent had calculated. He had not accounted for the cold. The cold required more calories to maintain body temperature. The cold meant that their bodies were burning energy faster, that the oatmeal and the soup and the beans were not enough. He had recalculated and determined that they had 4 weeks of food, not 6. He had not told Alma. Instead, he had started skipping lunch. He had done it quietly, without comment. He had eaten his oatmeal in the morning and his beans at night, and he had pretended that the midday meal did not exist. He had drunk extra water to fill his stomach. He had chewed on twigs to give his jaw something to do. He had not complained. Alma had noticed on the 3rd day. Vincent, she had said, you are not eating lunch. I'm not hungry. You are not eating lunch because you are trying to save food for me. Vincent had not denied it. He had looked at his wife, at the catalog tray on the ledge, at the notebook in her hands, and he had said, I am trying to make sure we survive. We will survive together, Alma had said, or we will not survive at all. She had divided their portions equally from that day forward. She had also started foraging, collecting edible plants from the floodplain dandelion greens, chickweed, wild garlic. She had remembered a book she had cataloged in 1987, Edible Wild Plants of North America, and she had reconstructed the illustrations from memory. She had shown Vincent which plants were safe, which were poisonous, which could be used for medicine. Vincent had looked at her and seen that she was still a librarian. She was still cataloging the world. She was still finding order in chaos, meaning in entropy, hope in the smallest details. He had loved her more in that moment than he had ever loved anyone. The weeks had passed. November had turned to December. The temperature had dropped below freezing and stayed there. The stream had iced over, and Vincent had to break the ice every morning to collect water. The firewood had become scarce, and he had started burning the corrugated metal windbreak piece by piece, knowing that they would need the heat more than they needed the wind protection. Alma had kept writing. She had reached 500 titles by the end of the 6th week. She had filled the entire notebook, front to back, with the names of books she had cataloged, books she had read, books she had loved, books she had hated, books she had recommended, books she had hidden from children who were too young for their content. She had written the titles in alphabetical order, the way they would have been arranged in the catalog tray. She had written the authors' names, the publication dates, the ISBNs where she remembered them. She had written notes about the condition of each book when she had last seen it, the names of the readers who had borrowed it, the conversations she had had about it. She had created a library out of memory. And then, on the 8th week, she had found something. She had been reviewing her list, checking for gaps, when she had noticed a title that did not belong. It was not in the BC section. It was not a book she had cataloged. It was a book she had read once, in a different library, in a different life, and she had never told anyone about it. The Lost Books of the Bodleian Library, 1647-1652. She had written it in the margin of the notebook, next to the entry for The Lost City of Z by David Gran. She had not meant to write it. It had come out of her hand as if the book itself had been waiting to be found, as if it had been hiding in her memory for 28 years, waiting for the right moment to emerge. She had looked at the title and remembered, the summer of 1995. A donation of bound manuscripts from an elderly woman who had died and left her collection to the library. Alma had been cataloging the manuscripts when she had found a reference to a lost archive, books that had been removed from the Bodleian Library in Oxford during the English Civil War, hidden in a private collection, and never returned. The reference had been brief, a single sentence in a 100-year-old letter, but it had mentioned a name, Sir Thomas Coventry, a royalist who had fled to France in 1647, taking with him a trunk of books from the Bodleian. The books had never been found. The trunk had never been recovered. The archive had been lost to history. Alma had made a note on a catalog card and filed it in the BC section of the tray. She had intended to research the lost books, to trace their history, to see if they could be recovered. But then Daniel had died, and Mark had grown distant, and the library had converted to digital, and she had retired. She had never researched the lost books, but she had kept the card. She had kept it for 28 years, carrying it from the library to her house to the bridge abutment, and she had never known why. Now, sitting on a stone floor in a bridge abutment in December, with her husband sleeping next to her and her catalog tray on a ledge above her head, Alma looked at the title in the margin of the notebook and understood. The lost books were not just books. They were proof that things could be found again. They were proof that nothing was truly lost, and she had the card that would lead to them. Therefore, she thought, I am still a librarian. I still know what is missing. Therefore, she thought, I still have something to offer the world. Therefore, she thought, we are not dead yet. The card had been in the catalog tray for 28 years. Alma had put it there on her last day of work, in the pocket marked BC, behind the divider that separated the titles beginning with B from those beginning with C. She had tucked it in so that it faced backward, invisible to anyone who pulled the tray forward. She had never intended to find it again, but she had. The card was standard library stock, 3 inches by 5 inches, cream-colored, with a faint grid on the back for notes. The front was typed, as was standard for catalog cards in 1995, with the title in bold, the author in regular type, and the publication information in italics. The Lost Books of the Bodleian Library, 1647 and 1652, attributed to Sir Thomas Coventry, no publication information available. Manuscript reference, Bodleian MS Don. E. 2 and 43, below the typed information Alma had written in pen. See also, letter from Sir Thomas Coventry to Lady Anne Coventry, dated 1648, held in the Coventry Family Archive, location unknown. She had written that in 1995, and she had never followed up. Now she read the card again, and she saw what she had missed. The Coventry Family Archive. She had assumed it was lost. She had assumed that the family had died out, that the letters had been destroyed, that the trail had gone cold. But she had not checked. She had not even tried. Therefore, she thought I was wrong. Therefore, she thought I need to find out if the archive still exists. She looked at Vincent, who was sleeping next to her, his breath fogging in the cold air. He had not eaten in 2 days. He had given her his portion of the beans, claiming that he was not hungry, and she had pretended to believe him. They had 4 days of food left, maybe 5 if they rationed carefully. After that, they would have to make a choice. But the card in her hand was a choice. It was a choice to believe that the world still held something for them. It was a choice to believe that a 28-year-old catalog card could lead to a future. It was a choice to believe that the lost books were not lost forever, that they were simply waiting to be found. Alma had never stopped being a librarian. She had never stopped believing in the power of what was missing. She woke Vincent at dawn. "Vincent," she said, "I need to go to a library." He looked at her, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. "A library? I need to research something." The card in the catalog tray. "It's a lead. It might be nothing. But it might be something." Vincent sat up slowly, his joints creaking in the cold. He looked at the card in her hand, at the typed letters and the handwritten notes, and he understood that this was not just a card. This was a door. This was a way out. "Where is the nearest library?" he asked. 20 miles, the county library in Millbrook. "We don't have enough gas. We have enough to get there, not to get back." Vincent was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "We'll figure out the return trip when we get there." They packed the Taurus with everything they owned, the catalog tray, the slide rule, the notebook, the photographs, the percolator, the cast iron skillet. They left the bridge abutment as they had found it, clean and empty, as if no one had ever lived there. They drove to Millbrook. The county library was a brick building from 1912, with a stone foundation and a copper roof that had turned green with age. It was exactly the kind of building that Alma had spent her life in, and she felt a pang of recognition as she walked through the front door. The librarian at the desk was young, maybe 30, with glasses and a cardigan and the kind of face that had never known real hunger. She looked at Alma and Vincent with the polite wariness that comes from dealing with people who might be homeless. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to access your genealogical database," Alma said, "and your historical newspaper archives." The librarian looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have a library card?" Alma reached into her coat and pulled out her old library card from the Santa Fe Public Library. It had expired in 2008, but she had kept it anyway, because some things were worth keeping. The librarian looked at the card. Then she looked at Alma's hands, at the dirt under her fingernails, at the coat that had not been washed in weeks. "I'm sorry," the librarian said. "This card is expired, and you don't live in the county." Alma did not argue. She did not plead. She simply took out the catalog card and set it on the counter. "I spent 42 years as a librarian," she said. "I cataloged books in 3 states. I built a library out of memory in a bridge abutment, and I have a lead on a lost archive that has not been seen since 1647. I need to access your database. I need to find out if the Coventry family archive still exists." The librarian looked at the card. She read the typed letters. She read the handwritten notes. She looked at Alma's face, at the lines of cold and hunger and hope. "Okay," she said. "Let me show you how to use the system." Alma spent the next 3 hours in the library's genealogy room, searching through databases and newspaper archives and family histories. She found the Coventry family tree, which traced back to the 16th century. She found a reference to Sir Thomas Coventry in a book about royalist exiles. She found a letter from Lady Anne Coventry to her son, dated 1650, mentioning the trunk of books, and she found the Coventry family archive. It was held at the University of Virginia Library, in a special collections room, in a box marked Coventry Family Papers, 1620-1750. The box had been donated in 1972 by a descendant who had found it in the attic of a house in Virginia. It had not been cataloged online. It had not been digitized. It was simply sitting in a box, waiting for someone to open it. Alma's breath caught. She wrote down the box number, the accession number, the phone number of the special collections librarian. Her hands trembled as she folded the paper and tucked it into her coat pocket. Vincent was waiting by the front door, flipping through a book on local bird species. He looked up when she approached, and she saw the question in his eyes. "It exists," she said. "It's at UVA, in a box. Unopened since 1972. He closed the book." "That's a long way from Millbrook. I know. We don't have a car anymore. I know. And we don't have money for a bus or a train or even a tank of gas." Alma looked at him. For a moment, the weight of everything they had lost pressed down on her shoulders. The bridge abutment. The catalogs. The life she had built out of salvage and silence. The cold nights and the empty stomachs. The hope that had kept her going through decades of nothing. And then she thought of the box. The box that had been sitting in a room for 50 years, waiting for someone to open it. The box that held the answer to a question that had been asked in 1647. "We'll walk," she said. Vincent did not laugh. He did not argue. He simply said, "Let me see the map." They left Millbrook on a Tuesday morning in late October, when the leaves were turning and the air had the sharp edge of coming frost. They walked south on Route 29 past farms and gas stations and strip malls, past churches and schools and houses with lit windows. Alma carried her notebook and the catalog card in a plastic bag. Vincent carried the slide rule and the percolator in a backpack he had found at a thrift store for $2. They walked for 6 days. At night, they slept in ditches and under bridges and once in a barn that had been left open. They ate crackers and peanut butter and apples they picked from trees along the road. They did not talk much, because there was nothing to say that had not already been said. They simply walked. On the 7th day, they reached Charlottesville. The University of Virginia was everything that Alma had remembered and nothing that she had expected. The red brick and white columns, the serpentine walls and the lawn, the students with their laptops and their coffee cups and their easy confidence. She felt like a ghost walking through a world that had moved on without her. The Special Collections Library was in a building that smelled of old paper and floor wax and the particular silence that only exists in rooms where the past is kept alive. Alma approached the front desk with her hands shaking and her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm here to see the Coventry family papers," she said. Box 42A. The librarian was a woman in her 50s, with gray hair and reading glasses, and the kind of face that had seen 1,000 requests exactly like this one. She typed something into her computer and frowned. "I'm sorry," she said. "That box has been checked out." Alma felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Checked out? To whom?" The librarian looked at the screen. "To a researcher, Dr. Eleanor Vance. She signed it out 3 days ago." Alma's stomach dropped. Eleanor Vance. The name was not familiar, but the timing was too precise to be coincidence. 3 days ago, exactly when they had started walking from Millbrook. "Can you tell me where I can find Dr. Vance?" she asked. The librarian shook her head. "I'm not allowed to share patron information. But I can tell you that she's a visiting scholar from Oxford. She's been here for 2 weeks, working on a project about royalist exiles." Alma closed her eyes. The world had narrowed to a single point of light, and someone else had stepped in front of it. They found Eleanor Vance in the main reading room, sitting at a long wooden table with the box open in front of her. She was a woman in her late 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a bun and wire-rimmed glasses. She was wearing a tweed jacket and a look of intense concentration, and she did not look up when Alma and Vincent entered. Alma walked over to the table. She stood in front of Eleanor Vance and waited. After a long moment, Eleanor looked up. Her eyes were the color of slate, and they held no warmth. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I need to see that box," Alma said. "I've been looking for it for 30 years. Eleanor's expression did not change. "I'm afraid you'll have to wait. I'm using it for my research." "Your research on what exactly?" Eleanor set down her pen. "On the Coventry family. Specifically, on Sir Thomas Coventry's library and its dispersal after the English Civil War. I've been tracking it for 5 years. Alma felt a cold hand close around her heart. "I've been tracking it for 30. Then you should have been faster." Vincent stepped forward. His presence was quiet but steady like a rock in a river. "We've come a long way," he said. "We don't have much. We just want to see what's in the box." Eleanor looked at him, then back at Alma. She seemed to weigh something, some calculation that Alma could not see. Then she said, "Sit down. I'll show you what I've found." They sat across from her, and Eleanor turned the box around so they could see its contents. There were letters, folded and yellowed, tied with ribbons that had long since lost their color. There were account books and legal documents and a small leather-bound journal with a broken spine. And there was a catalog. It was a thin book, bound in calfskin, with pages that had been written in a careful, elegant hand. The title page read, "A Catalogue of the Library of Sir Thomas Coventry, Knight, taken at his manor of Braddon in the year 1647. Alma reached out and touched the page. Her fingers traced the letters, the ink that had been laid down by a hand that had been dust for 300 years. The words blurred before her eyes. "It's real," she whispered. "Yes," Eleanor said. "It's real, and it's mine." Alma looked up. "Yours?" Eleanor's smile was thin and sharp. "I found it first. I documented it first. I have the funding and the academic credentials to publish it." "You have nothing but a story and a dead end." The words hit Alma like a physical blow. She had spent 30 years chasing this. She had given up her job, her home, her life. She had slept in a bridge abutment. She had eaten out of dumpsters. She had held onto this hope like a drowning woman holding onto a piece of wreckage. And now this woman, this scholar with her tweed jacket and her grant money and her easy confidence, was telling her that it meant nothing. "Please," Alma said, "I just want to copy the catalog. I just want to see the list of books. That's all I've ever wanted." Eleanor closed the box. "I'm sorry, but I can't allow that. I'm working on a tight deadline, and I can't risk anyone else publishing my findings." She stood up, tucked the box under her arm, and walked out of the reading room. Alma sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where the box had been. Vincent reached over and took her hand. She did not pull away. "We'll figure something out," he said. She did not answer. That night, they slept in a park on the edge of campus, on a bench that was just long enough for Alma to lie down if she curled her knees. Vincent sat on the ground with his back against the bench, watching the stars. "She's going to publish it," Alma said. "And no one will ever know that I was the one who found it, that I was the one who traced it from Santa Fe to Millbrook, that I was the one who spent 30 years chasing a ghost. You'll know," Vincent said. "That's not enough." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" Alma did not have an answer. They stayed in Charlottesville for 3 days. Alma went back to the library every morning and asked to see the box. Every morning she was told that it was still checked out to Dr. Vance. She asked when it would be returned. She was told the loan period was indefinite. On the third day, she was sitting in the reading room, staring at a book she was not reading, when a young man sat down across from her. He was maybe 25, with sandy hair and a nervous energy that made him seem like he was vibrating in place. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Alma?" She looked up. "I'm Jacob. I'm a graduate student. I work with Dr. Vance." Alma's heart began to beat faster. "What do you want?" Jacob leaned forward. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "I overheard you talking to her about the Coventry catalog. I've been working with her for a year, and I know what she's doing." "What is she doing?" He looked around, as if checking that no one was listening. "She's planning to publish it under her own name. She's going to claim she discovered it. She's already erased all the provenance records that show it was found by someone else." Alma felt the world tilt again. "Someone else? Who?" Jacob hesitated. Then he said, "A woman named Margaret Chen. She was a librarian at the University of Virginia in the 1970s. She cataloged the Coventry papers when they were first donated. She found the catalog, transcribed it, and started researching it. But she died in 1982 before she could publish. Dr. Vance found her notes in the archives. She's been using them as her own." Alma's hands were shaking. "How do you know this?" "Because I found Margaret Chen's research journal in the basement of the library, in a box that was marked for disposal." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a spiral notebook, its pages yellowed and brittle. "This is her work. 50 years of research. All of it pointing to the same thing you've been looking for." He set the notebook on the table. Alma looked at it. She looked at Jacob. She looked at the notebook again. "Why are you giving this to me?" she asked. Jacob's face twisted. "Because I can't watch her do this again. She's built her career on other people's work. She did it to her advisor at Oxford. She did it to a colleague at Cambridge. And now she's doing it to Margaret Chen, who can't defend herself." He stood up. "I'm leaving the program. I can't work for her anymore. But I wanted someone to know the truth." He walked away, leaving the notebook on the table. Alma picked it up. She opened it to the first page. It was dated 1973. The handwriting was neat and precise, the handwriting of a librarian who had spent her life making order out of chaos. She read the first entry. "Today I found the Coventry catalog. It was in a box that had been mislabeled. No one has looked at it in 30 years. I think it may be the most important thing I have ever found." Alma closed the book. She looked at Vincent, who had been sitting silently beside her. "I know what we have to do," she said. Act 6. Karma. They went to the Dean of Libraries the next morning. Alma brought the notebook, the catalog card, and the letters she had written over 30 years. Vincent brought the slide rule, which he placed on the dean's desk like a talisman. The dean was a woman named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, and she listened to Alma's story with a patience that Alma had not expected. When Alma finished, Dr. Okonkwo looked at the notebook, at the catalog card, at the letters. "This is a serious accusation," she said. "I know," Alma said, "and I can prove it." She opened the notebook to the last entry, dated 1982. It contained a detailed description of the Coventry catalog, including the exact phrasing of the first entry and the condition of the binding. It also included a note that read, "I have spoken to the head of special collections about my findings. He has promised to help me publish. I am hopeful." Alma looked up. Margaret Chen died in a car accident 2 weeks after she wrote this. Her research was never published. And now Dr. Vance is claiming it as her own. Dr. Okonkwo was silent for a long time. Then she picked up the phone. "I need to see Dr. Vance in my office immediately," she said. Eleanor Vance arrived 20 minutes later. She was wearing the same tweed jacket, but her hair was slightly disheveled and her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked like she had not slept. "Dr. Okonkwo," she said. "What's this about?" The dean gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Sit down, Dr. Vance." Eleanor sat. She looked at Alma, and her expression hardened. I see you've been busy. I've been busy for 30 years, Alma said. You've been busy for 3 days. Dr. Okonkwo held up the notebook. Do you recognize this? Eleanor's face went pale. That's not mine. I know, Dr. Okonkwo said. It belonged to Margaret Chen, a librarian who worked here until her death in 1982. She discovered the Coventry catalog and spent a decade researching it. Her work was never published. Eleanor's hands were trembling. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Dr. Okonkwo opened the notebook and read a passage aloud. The Coventry catalog contains 1,247 entries, including 23 works of theology, 14 works of history, and a single volume of poetry by a woman identified only as E. She looked up. Dr. Vance, this is the same description you submitted in your grant application. Word for word, Eleanor said nothing. I'm placing you on immediate administrative leave, Dr. Okonkwo said. Your access to the archives will be revoked, and I will be contacting the University of Oxford to inform them of this matter. Eleanor stood up. Her face was a mask of fury. You can't do this. I have a reputation. I have a career. You had a career, Dr. Okonkwo said. Now you have a choice. You can resign voluntarily, or I can have you escorted off campus. Eleanor looked at Alma. Her eyes were burning. This isn't over, she said. Yes, Alma said. It is. Eleanor walked out of the office. Door closed behind her with a soft click. Alma sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her heart pounding in her chest. She had not expected to feel empty. She had not expected to feel anything at all. The Coventry catalog will be returned to you, Dr. Okonkwo said, and I would like to offer you a position as a visiting scholar, to complete Margaret Chen's work. Alma looked at Vincent. He was smiling, a small, quiet smile that reached his eyes. I don't know how to do that, she said. I've been out of the academic world for a long time. You've been in it longer than most of us, Dr. Okonkwo said. You've been living it, every day. For 30 years, Alma took a deep breath. She thought of the bridge abutment, the cold nights, the empty stomachs. She thought of the catalog card, the percolator, the cast iron skillet. She thought of Vincent, who had walked beside her through every step of it. Okay, she said. I'll do it. Act 7, Peace. Not revenge, they gave Alma a small office on the 3rd floor of the library with a window that looked out over the lawn. She set up her desk with the percolator and the catalog card and the notebook that had started it all. Vincent brought in the cast iron skillet and hung it on the wall. She spent the next 3 months cataloging the Coventry catalog. She compared it to Margaret Chen's notes, filled in the gaps, traced the provenance of every book. She wrote letters to libraries in England and Scotland and Ireland, asking for information about books that had been lost for centuries. And she found them. One by one, the books surfaced. A copy of Calvin's Institutes in the Bodleian, a volume of poetry by a woman named Elizabeth Cole in the National Library of Scotland, a theological treatise in the library of Trinity College, Dublin. Each one was a piece of a puzzle that had been waiting for 300 years to be solved. The day she finished the final entry, she sat back in her chair and looked at the stack of papers on her desk. The catalog was complete. The books had been found. The story had been told. Vincent came in with 2 cups of coffee from the percolator. He set one down in front of her. You did it, he said. We did it, she said. He sat down across from her. What happens now? Alma looked out the window. The leaves had fallen, and the branches were bare against the gray November sky. The world was quiet and still. I don't know, she said. I guess we go home. She meant the office. She meant the library. But when she said it, she realized that she did not know where home was anymore. They packed up their things that evening. The percolator, the catalog card, the notebook, the photographs. They left the cast iron skillet on the wall, because it belonged there now. On her desk, Alma found a note. It was written on a piece of stationery from the University of Oxford, and it was unsigned. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Alma read the note 3 times. She did not feel anger. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt only a quiet, distant ache, like a wound that had finally healed. She folded the note and put it in her pocket. They walked out of the library together into the cold evening air. The stars were coming out one by one, and the campus was quiet. Students walked past them, laughing and talking, wrapped in scarves and coats. Alma stopped in the middle of the lawn. She looked up at the sky. What is it? Vincent asked. Nothing, she said. I was just thinking about the bridge. He nodded. He understood. They walked to the bus station and bought 2 tickets to Santa Fe. The bus would leave at midnight, and they would arrive in 2 days. They had no plan, no destination, no idea what came next. But as they sat in the waiting room, side by side, Alma reached into her pocket and pulled out the catalog card, the one she had kept for 30 years, the one that had started everything. She held it in her hands, and she thought about the books that had been lost and found. The library that had been built and rebuilt. The catalog that had been written and rewritten. She looked at Vincent. He was asleep, his head resting against the window, his face peaceful. She tucked the catalog card back into her pocket. The bus arrived, and they climbed aboard. They found 2 seats in the back, and Alma sat by the window. The lights of Charlottesville flickered past as the bus pulled out of the station. Alma did not know what she would do when she got to Santa Fe. She did not know if she would find the bridge abutment empty or full. She did not know if she would stay or leave. But as the bus carried them west, through the dark and the cold and the endless stretch of road, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt at peace. The catalog card was still in her pocket. The percolator was in her bag. Vincent was beside her, and somewhere, in a library she had never seen, a box sat on a shelf, waiting for someone to open it.